The reception hall went silent. Not the comfortable kind of silence that falls during a toast or a prayer, but the kind that makes your stomach drop. The kind where 300 people stop mid-conversation, forks hovering over plates, champagne glasses frozen halfway to lips. Every eye turned toward the entrance. The bride, radiant in her ivory gown just seconds ago, felt her smile crack and fall away like cheap plaster. Her hand, the one with the enormous diamond engagement ring, trembled against her new husband's arm, because standing in the doorway, backlit by the golden afternoon sun, was a man she never thought would actually show up. Her ex-husband, the man she'd divorced 3 years ago when his bank account hit zero and his credit cards were declined at the grocery store. The man she'd mocked to her friends, calling him a failure, a dreamer with no future. The same man she'd invited to this wedding, not out of kindness or closure, but as a final, calculated insult. She wanted him to see her triumph. She wanted him to feel small. But as he stepped into that hall, something was different. Terribly, impossibly different. And in the next 60 seconds, everyone in that room would understand that this wedding was about to become unforgettable for all the wrong reasons. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you, and if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. His name was Marcus, 34 years old, average height, the kind of face you'd pass on the street without a second glance unless you looked into his eyes. Those eyes told a different story. They carried the weight of a man who'd been broken and rebuilt, not with bitterness, but with something quieter and far more dangerous called conviction. 3 years ago, Marcus had been married to a woman named Vanessa. They'd met in college, fell in love over late-night study sessions and dreams of building something beautiful together. He was studying business, she was in marketing. They talked about opening a small company, maybe a consulting firm, maybe something in tech. The details didn't matter as much as the partnership. They got married young, 25 and 23, in a simple ceremony at her parents' backyard. No fancy venue, no designer dress, just two people who believed in each other. For the first 2 years, things were good. Marcus worked 60-hour weeks at a startup, coming home exhausted but optimistic. Vanessa handled their social media presence, trying to build a brand around the lifestyle they wanted to project. But somewhere around year 3, the cracks started showing. Marcus's startup began to fail. The investors pulled out after a product launch flopped. The company downsized, then collapsed entirely. Marcus found himself jobless, his savings drained, staring at a stack of bills he couldn't pay. He took odd jobs, driving for a rideshare company, doing freelance consulting, anything to keep them afloat. But Vanessa's patience wore thin. She'd grown up in a comfortable home, never wanting for anything, and the sudden shift to budgeting, to saying no to dinners out, to skipping brunches with friends because they couldn't afford it, it changed her. She started looking at Marcus differently, not with love, but with something closer to disappointment, maybe even disgust. The fights started small. Why can't you find a better job? Why did you waste our savings on that failed business? Why can't you be more like Vanessa's friends' husbands, who had stable corporate jobs, who took their wives on vacations, who didn't flinch when the check came at dinner? Marcus tried to explain that failure wasn't permanent, that he was working on something new, that he just needed time. But Vanessa had stopped listening. She'd already started seeing someone else, a man named Derek, tall, confident, senior account executive at a pharmaceutical company. The kind of man who wore tailored suits and drove a leased BMW and talked about his portfolio at parties. Derek had money. Derek had status. Derek had everything Marcus didn't. The divorce was quick and cruel. Vanessa didn't ask for much financially because there wasn't much to take. But she took something more valuable. She took his dignity. In the final meeting with their lawyers, she looked at Marcus across the table and said, "I wasted 5 years on you. I should have known better than to marry someone with no ambition." Those words carved themselves into Marcus's chest. He signed the papers in silence, walked out of that office, and sat in his car for 20 minutes, hands shaking on the steering wheel, trying to remember how to breathe. He'd lost his business, his wife, and his sense of self in the span of 8 months. For a while, He thought about giving up entirely. Not in a dramatic way, but in the quiet, soul-crushing way people do when they stop believing tomorrow will be any different from today. But then something shifted. Marcus's grandmother, the woman who'd raised him after his parents died in a car accident when he was 9, called him one evening. She was 83, living in a small town 2 hours away, surviving on Social Security and a pension. She didn't have much, but she had wisdom. She told him a story about his grandfather, a factory worker who'd been laid off during a recession and spent 2 years unemployed, taking any work he could find, even cleaning floors at night, just to keep food on the table. "Your grandfather never complained," she said. "He never made excuses. He just kept moving forward, one step at a time. And eventually, things turned around. Not because he got lucky, but because he refused to stay down." That conversation changed something in Marcus. He realized he'd been waiting for life to give him permission to succeed again. But permission wasn't coming. He had to take it. Marcus started small. He reached out to an old mentor from college, a man named Robert Townsend, who'd built a successful logistics company from scratch. Robert had always liked Marcus, saw something in him that reminded Robert of himself at that age. When Marcus explained his situation, Robert didn't offer pity. He offered a job, not a handout, but a real position as a junior operations manager, with the understanding that Marcus would have to prove himself every single day. Marcus took it. He worked harder than he'd ever worked in his life. He studied logistics, supply chain management, negotiation tactics, everything he could absorb. He showed up early, stayed late, and treated every task like it mattered. Robert noticed. 6 months in, Robert pulled Marcus into his office and said, "I'm expanding into the Southeast. I need someone I can trust to run the new division. It's risky, it's a lot of pressure, but if you pull it off, you'll be set for life." Marcus didn't hesitate. He moved across the state, set up the new office, hired a small team, and poured everything he had into making it work. There were nights he slept on a cot in the office, days he skipped meals because he was too busy, moments he doubted whether he could actually do it. But slowly, painfully, the division started to grow. Clients signed on. Revenue climbed. Within 18 months, Marcus had turned the Southeast Division into the most profitable branch of the entire company. Robert promoted him to vice president and gave him a significant equity stake in the business. By the time 3 years had passed since the divorce, Marcus was making more money than he'd ever imagined. Not rich in the flashy, Instagram way, but comfortable, secure, respected. And then, one day, an envelope arrived at his apartment. Thick, cream-colored cardstock, embossed with gold lettering, a wedding invitation. Marcus stared at the names on the front. "Vanessa Monroe and Derek Hastings request the honor of your presence." His first instinct was to throw it away. Why would she invite him? They hadn't spoken in 3 years. She'd made it clear she wanted nothing to do with him. But as he read the invitation more closely, he understood. The wedding was being held at the Ashford estate, one of the most expensive venues in the state. The kind of place that required a 6-figure budget just to book. Vanessa wanted him to see it. She wanted him to know that she'd moved on, that she'd found someone better, that she'd been right to leave him. This wasn't an invitation. It was a message, and for a moment, Marcus felt that old familiar ache. The one that reminded him of sitting in his car after signing the divorce papers, feeling like the smallest person in the world. But then he thought about his grandmother's words. He thought about the last 3 years, the work he'd put in, the person he'd become. And he made a decision. He RSVP'd yes. He was going to that wedding, not to cause a scene, not to get revenge, but to prove something to himself. That he was no longer the man Vanessa had left behind. If this story has your heart beating, comment "I'm still watching." Let's see who's following till the end. The day of the wedding arrived on a Saturday in late September. The weather was perfect, the kind of autumn afternoon that photographers dream about. Marcus drove to the Ashford estate in his car, a modest but well-maintained sedan. He wasn't trying to impress anyone with what he drove. He'd learned that real confidence didn't need to announce itself. He wore a charcoal gray suit, tailored to fit perfectly, paired with a simple white shirt and a navy tie. Nothing flashy, nothing desperate, just clean, sharp, and dignified. As he pulled into the estate's long, tree-lined driveway, he saw the other guests arriving in their luxury cars, BMWs, Mercedes, Teslas. He recognized a few faces, mutual friends from his marriage to Vanessa, people who'd stopped returning his calls after the divorce. He parked, took a deep breath, and walked toward the main entrance. The ceremony had already finished. Guests were making their way to the reception hall, a massive room with vaulted ceilings, crystal chandeliers, and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a manicured garden. A live band played softly in the corner. Waiters circulated with trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres. It was exactly the kind of wedding Vanessa had always wanted. Marcus stepped inside, and almost immediately, he felt the shift. Conversations paused. Heads turned. Whispers started. Is that Marcus? What is he doing here? Did Vanessa actually invite him? He kept his expression neutral, his shoulders back, and made his way to the bar. He ordered a club soda, not because he didn't drink, but because he wanted to stay sharp. He wasn't here to numb himself, he was here to be present. Across the room, Vanessa saw him. She was standing with Derek, her new husband, surrounded by bridesmaids and groomsmen, all of them laughing at some joke Derek had just told. But when her eyes landed on Marcus, the laughter died in her throat. She felt a jolt of something she couldn't quite name. Shock? Anger? Fear? She'd expected Marcus to show up looking defeated, maybe in an ill-fitting suit from a discount store, maybe with the same tired, beaten-down expression he'd worn the last time she'd seen him. But this man, this version of Marcus, was different. He stood taller, his suit fit him like it was made for him. His face was calm, almost serene, like he had nothing to prove and nothing to fear. Derek noticed her staring and followed her gaze. "Who's that?" he asked. Vanessa swallowed hard. "My ex-husband." Derek's eyebrows shot up. "You invited your ex-husband to our wedding?" "I thought it would be funny," Vanessa said, her voice tight. "I thought he'd show up looking pathetic." Derek studied Marcus for a moment, then shrugged. "He doesn't look pathetic. He looks like he's doing fine." Vanessa didn't respond, because Derek was right. And that realization made her stomach twist. Marcus didn't approach Vanessa. He didn't need to. He simply existed in that space, calm and unbothered, and let the room come to him. And it did. One by one, old acquaintances wandered over, curiosity getting the better of them. "Marcus, hey, it's been a long time. How have you been?" "Fine," Marcus would say, offering a polite smile. "Working a lot. Keeping busy." "What are you doing now?" "I'm a VP at Townsend Logistics, running the Southeast Division." The reactions were subtle but telling. Eyes widening just a fraction. A pause before the next question. "Oh, wow. That's great." "Yeah, I've been really fortunate." The word fortunate was deliberate. Marcus didn't brag. He didn't need to. He simply stated facts and let people draw their own conclusions. Within 30 minutes, the whispers had shifted. "Did you hear? Marcus is a vice president now. Apparently he's doing really well. I heard he's making serious money." Vanessa is probably kicking herself. Vanessa heard the whispers too. She tried to ignore them, tried to focus on her wedding, on Derek, on the life she'd built. But every time she glanced toward the bar, there was Marcus, surrounded by people, laughing at something someone said, completely at ease. It was infuriating. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. He was supposed to slink in, feel out of place, and leave early. He was supposed to remind everyone why she'd been right to leave him. Instead, he was making her look like the fool. Dinner was served. A 5-course meal that probably cost more per plate than Marcus used to make in a week back when he was driving for rideshares. He sat at a table near the back, not at the head table obviously, but not hidden away either. The people at his table were friendly, asking him questions, genuinely interested in his life. He answered honestly, humbly, never once making the conversation about how far he'd come or how much he'd overcome. But the subtext was there. Everyone could feel it. Halfway through the main course, Derek stood up to give a speech. He tapped his glass with a knife, and the room quieted. He thanked everyone for coming, talked about how lucky he was to have found Vanessa, how she was the love of his life, how they were going to build an amazing future together. It was a standard groom's speech, polished and rehearsed. But then Derek said something that made Marcus's jaw tighten. You know, Vanessa has been through a lot. She's had to deal with people who didn't appreciate her, who didn't see her value, but I see it, and I promise, I'll give her everything she deserves. The implication was clear. Derek was talking about Marcus. The room shifted uncomfortably. A few people glanced toward Marcus, waiting for a reaction. But Marcus didn't react. He simply took a sip of his water and kept his expression neutral, because he understood something Derek didn't. Vanessa hadn't left Marcus because he didn't appreciate her. She'd left because she couldn't handle the struggle. And now, sitting in this overpriced hall, married to a man who measured love in dollar signs, she was learning what appreciation really meant. After dinner, the dancing started. Vanessa and Derek took the floor for their first dance, a slow, romantic number that was supposed to be the highlight of the evening. But Vanessa couldn't focus. Her eyes kept drifting toward Marcus, who was now talking with Robert Townsend. Wait, Robert Townsend? Vanessa felt her heart drop. She recognized him from a business magazine cover she'd seen a few months ago. Townsend Logistics had just been named one of the fastest-growing companies in the region. And Marcus worked for him? No, Marcus was his vice president. The realization hit her like a truck. Marcus wasn't just doing okay, he was thriving. And she'd had no idea. The song ended. Derek kissed her, and the room applauded. But Vanessa barely heard it. She excused herself, told Derek she needed to use the restroom, and made her way toward the back of the hall. She needed air, she needed to think. But as she passed the bar, she saw Marcus standing there, alone for the first time all evening. She stopped, their eyes met, and before she could think better of it, she walked over. Marcus, she said, her voice quiet. Marcus turned to face her fully. He didn't smile, but he didn't glare either. He just looked at her, waiting. Vanessa hesitated, suddenly unsure of what to say. I didn't think you'd actually come. You invited me, Marcus said simply. I know, but I thought, she trailed off, then forced herself to continue. I thought you'd still be struggling. Marcus nodded slowly. I was. For a long time, but I'm not anymore. Vanessa bit her lip. I heard you're doing well now. Working for Robert Townsend. Yeah. He gave me a chance when no one else would. Vanessa looked down at her hands, at the massive diamond on her finger. It suddenly felt heavy. I'm glad you're okay, she said, and there was something in her voice that sounded almost like regret. Marcus studied her for a moment. Are you? Vanessa looked up, startled. What? Are you okay? The question hung in the air between them. Vanessa opened her mouth to answer. To say of course she was okay. She'd just married a successful man. She had everything she wanted. But the words wouldn't come, because standing there, looking at Marcus, at the man she'd once loved and then abandoned, she realized something terrible. She wasn't okay. She was married to a man who loved the idea of her more than the reality. A man who measured her worth in social media posts and designer handbags. A man who'd given that speech tonight, not to celebrate her, but to prove something to a room full of people who didn't really matter. Marcus saw the conflict in her eyes. He saw the same fear he'd felt 3 years ago, sitting in his car after signing the divorce papers. And despite everything, despite the pain she'd caused him, he felt something unexpected. Not love. Not anymore, but compassion. Vanessa, he said gently, I didn't come here to make you feel bad. I came because you invited me, and because I wanted to prove to myself that I'm not defined by the worst moment of my life. You did that to me once. You made me feel like I was worthless because I didn't have money. But I learned something important. Worth isn't measured by a bank account. It's measured by what you do when everything falls apart. Vanessa's eyes filled with tears. She blinked them back, but one escaped, sliding down her cheek. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm sorry for what I said. I'm sorry for how I treated you. Marcus nodded. I appreciate that, but you don't owe me an apology. You owe yourself one. Vanessa stared at him, confused. What do you mean? You left me because you thought I couldn't give you the life you wanted. But the truth is, you didn't know what you wanted. And I don't think you know now either. Vanessa flinched, like he'd slapped her. Marcus continued, his voice calm but firm. I hope Derek makes you happy. I really do, but if he doesn't, if you wake up one day and realize you married him for the wrong reasons, don't blame him. Don't blame me. Look in the mirror. And with that, Marcus set his glass down on the bar and walked away. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. Vanessa stood there, frozen, tears streaming down her face now, unable to move. A bridesmaid appeared at her side, concerned. Vanessa, are you okay? What happened? Vanessa wiped her eyes quickly, forced a smile. I'm fine. Just emotional. You know how weddings are. But she wasn't fine, and as she watched Marcus leave the reception hall, walking out into the cool evening air with his head held high, she realized something she should have known 3 years ago. She'd made the biggest mistake of her life. Not because Marcus had money now, but because she'd never appreciated him when it didn't matter. Marcus drove home that night with the windows down, the cool air filling his car. He didn't feel triumphant. He didn't feel vindicated. He just felt free. Free from the weight of needing Vanessa's approval. Free from the belief that his value depended on someone else's opinion. He thought about his grandmother, about the sacrifices his grandfather had made, about the lessons he'd learned the hard way. And he realized that the last 3 years hadn't been about proving Vanessa wrong. They'd been about proving himself right, that he was capable, that he was resilient, that he was enough. Just as he was. 6 months later, Marcus received a message on LinkedIn. It was from Vanessa. The message was short. I'm getting a divorce. I thought you should know. I don't expect anything from you. I just wanted to say thank you for what you said at the wedding. It took me a long time to understand, but you were right. I didn't know what I wanted. I still don't. But I'm trying to figure it out. I hope you're well. Marcus read the message twice, then closed it without responding. Not because he was angry. Not because he didn't care. But because Vanessa's journey wasn't his responsibility anymore. He'd moved on. Truly, completely moved on. He was dating someone new now, a woman named Claire who worked in non-profit management. She didn't care about his title or his salary. She cared about his character, his kindness, the way he treated waiters and janitors and everyone in between. She made him laugh. She challenged him. She saw him, and for the first time in years, Marcus felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. So, what's the lesson here? What's the takeaway from Marcus and Vanessa's story? It's not about revenge. It's not about proving people wrong. It's about knowing your worth, even when no one else does. Marcus could have let Vanessa's words destroy him. He could have stayed stuck in that moment, bitter and broken, replaying her insults on an endless loop. But he didn't. He chose to rebuild. Not for her. For himself. And that's the most powerful thing any of us can do. Because the truth is, people will underestimate you. People will abandon you when things get hard. People will measure your worth by shallow standards and walk away when you don't meet them. But that doesn't define you. What defines you is what you do next. Do you stay down? Or do you get up, dust yourself off, and keep moving forward? Marcus got up, and 3 years later, when he walked into that wedding, he didn't need to say a word. His presence, his confidence, his peace, they said everything. He didn't arrive to humiliate Vanessa. He arrived as living proof that the worst thing that ever happened to him had become the catalyst for the best version of himself. And that's what left everyone speechless. Not a car, not a watch, not a display of wealth. But the quiet, undeniable power of a man who decided he was worth more than anyone's opinion. So I'll leave you with this question. If you were Marcus, would you have gone to that wedding? Would you have walked into that room, knowing people expected you to fail? And more importantly, when life knocked you down, when someone you loved told you that you weren't enough, would you have had the strength to prove them wrong? Not to them, but to yourself. Think about that. Because one day, you might face your own version of that wedding. Your own moment where the world expects you to be small. And when that moment comes, you'll have a choice. Stay down, or rise up. Marcus chose to rise. What will you choose? Thank you for watching. If this story moved you, if it made you think about your own life, your own worth, your own journey, let us know in the comments. Share your thoughts. Tell us where you're watching from. And if you haven't already, subscribe so you never miss stories like this. Because these aren't just stories. They're reminders that no matter how far you fall, you can always climb back up. And sometimes, the view from the top is even better because you know what it took to get there. Until next time, remember this. Your worth isn't determined by who stays. It's determined by who you become after they leave.